so I'll call this meeting of the Standing Committee on City Finance Services to order. Madam Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
This is a Standing Committee on City Finance and Services with Councillor Meggs in the chair. Mayor Robertson is on leave of absence, Civic Business. Councillor Louie. Present. Councillor Stevenson is on leave of absence, Civic Business. Councillor Deal. Here. Councillor Jang. Here. Councillor Reimer. Here. Councillor Ball. Present. Councillor Carr. Here. Councillor Affleck. Here. And Councillor DeGenova. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So as chair for the meeting, I'm suggesting the reports that have no speakers or consideration items, we adopt the recommendations collectively in a single motion. There are no speakers registered for agenda items 1 and 2. Item 3 is a referral to public hearing. Does any member wish to hold any of these reports for debate, separate vote, or because of conflict of interest? Councillor Louie. Sorry, your mic was off, but 3.
Item number 3, please.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Recommendations have been approved. All those in favor, please show. I guess we'll try this. I got to get myself used to this again on the machine. So we'll go to a vote. Do you do that or do I do that? I know, but I'd like to practice. Yes, I did. Would you like to go to a vote? So is it there? I can't see it on mine, sorry. Voting, okay. Well, we passed a motion not to hold number 2. Yeah, sorry about that. Perhaps you could take it offline or bring it back under the business. Seriously. Okay, now I'm trying to get to the voting screen here. There we go. Okay, so are you ready for a vote? Please show. This is I think we got everybody, right? Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. So, pardon me. Okay, I was directed that you would end the vote, take it off. Okay, so you can take the vote off the screen. Maybe I misunderstood, but clerk told me if I did it too fast, it might disappear too quickly or something. So we can clarify that later. Okay, thanks very much. So we're going on to item 3. I think I saw Councillor Louie there. Would you want to?
Perhaps just have staff introduce the matter, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Jackson, you'll have to bear with me. I'm struggling this morning. I think you're good to go. Okay, Mr. Jackson, your mic's on and everything. Total package.
Mr. Chair, members of council, I'm going to try and demystify what this report is about as best as I can. As you all know, last week, Justice McEwen quashed 3 bylaws as they apply to a particular development in the Vancouver South area of downtown. He quashed the bylaw with respect to policy changes which had been made to the West End Plan and the Downtown East Side Plan after considerable public debate and discussion as part of the planning work that had been done on the plans themselves and as part of the public hearings that were held on those implementing bylaws following the adoption of the plan. He also quashed the zoning bylaw for a property at subject of the court hearing called Brenhill. He also quashed the development permit associated with a social housing project. This report does not address the rezoning quash issue or the development permit quash issue. This report only deals with the issue of the quashing of a policy issue about definitions of social housing that were put into the West End plan or followed from the adoption of the West End plan and the downtown east side. When the judge quashed the policy, his comment was about the notification of the change in policy for the definitions from low-cost housing to social housing. He did not comment on the amount of consultation that had happened. He did not comment on whether the definitions were appropriate or not. The only comment he made in his decision to quash the bylaw had to do with the amount of notification, such that it appeared to people who didn't live in the West End or didn't live in the downtown east side that this change did not apply to them, when in fact it did apply to them. It was changing the definitions throughout the entire ODP of the downtown. This correction we have noted, and it was one of the reasons why we have put this report forward for your consideration today. We acknowledge that the people who live in the rest of the downtown may not have been aware of the change to a definition that affected them. And so we wanted to bring forward a report to address this portion of the judge's decision. We thought it was important not only for the Brenhill decision as it affects the zoning bylaw and the development permit and the issues associated with a stop work order for a project which is under construction, but we did it in reaction to the need to move on with other projects throughout the downtown, including the West End, including Vancouver downtown south, and including the downtown east side, where we are looking at bonus density in order to achieve a very significant council objective of the provision of affordable housing. The only reason we are here today is a referral report which attempts to put back the definitions for social housing that were already considered by council for the West End and the downtown east side, and just make sure that everyone correctly this time is going to receive notification throughout the downtown. And that's the only reason we are here today, to correct one aspect of the judge's decision, so that it helps council address the front page articles about the lack of affordability of housing in Vancouver, and allows for the development community to respond to the ability to provide social housing in accordance with council's policy through a density bonusing plan. And it's correcting the density bonusing definitions for social housing that we needed to put back into the plan. And we felt that there was some urgency for moving forward on this aspect of the judge's decision.
Thanks, Mr. Jackson. I think you might have misspoke when you said correct the judge's decision. You mean respond to the judge's decision.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Yes,
Okay.
we never correct a judge's.
First speaker is Councillor Louis, if I can advance the queue here.
Thank you for that explanation. Your explanation is very clear, and certainly sets out the framework of and the intent of why staff brought this report forward, and I appreciate that. Having said that, certainly there is a great deal of confusion in the public, in the media, and even amongst, I think, some of the councillors as a result of seeing some of the comments in the media in relation to this situation that we find ourselves in. It is important, I think, for the public to understand clearly what it is that is before council for consideration. I don't believe that they have that information. The report, for a number of reasons, in order to get it just right, staff had numerous iterations of it and released it late. And for those reasons, I'm concerned that the public doesn't understand, and the correspondence that we're receiving with their comments and their questions indicates to me that there's a lack of clarity of what it is that we're doing here. Certainly, as you described, this is one piece of a much larger piece of issues that we need to deal with as a result of the decision by the courts. Mr. Chair, I'm intending to move a referral motion of this item back to staff in order to provide the clarity on the questions from council, assuming I have a number, and to allow the public additional time to review the staff proposal. My hope is that staff will come back to us with answers and embed into a refreshed report additional information describing just what you've articulated. Because in the current report, it doesn't, I believe, provide that clarity. There's some ambiguity in the report itself as well. And so, Mr. Chair, presupposing that other members of council would have questions to staff, my motion, I intend to move the motion and hopefully give some direction from staff through our questions and have that brought back to all of council and all of the public so that they can have a chance to understand this more fully before we refer it off. I do want to make the point that this is a referral situation where we move through to a public hearing and the public doesn't have the ability to come and speak to us directly on a referral to a public hearing. They speak to us at the public hearing. And that's why it's even more important for staff to have the opportunity to write into that, the next iteration of this report, the clarity that's necessary of what it is that our staff are proposing that we consider at that public hearing.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have distributed a motion of referral to the city clerk.
Well, Madam Clerk, could you put that up so everyone can see it, please? Is it there? I just think given the interest in this, it's good to have it visible for everyone. But so Councillor Louis has moved that it be referred back to staff. I propose to proceed in the following fashion. We'll determine if it's council's wish to refer it back to staff, and then we would have a round of questions from council to staff that would be answered in the report in the event that council approves this referral. So there'd be an opportunity for each councillor to highlight for staff the areas they'd like to see illuminated in a revised report, and then it would come back at some future date for a discussion at council and referral, and then the public would have their input at public hearing. So
it's not quite as I had sent, but it's close.
not quite. What was your?
Let me pull up my email.
One way or the other one again.
It's about to review the staff proposal in advance of move to refer the report, and you've added the exact report to provide clarity on questions from council and to allow the public additional time to review the staff proposal in advance of a future council meeting. In advance of a future council meeting. Did you not receive my email? Oh, it went to Laura for some reason. Okay. So, have you got it there? On the questions from council in order to. In advance of a future council meeting. Yeah, where's the public? So, and to allow public additional time, right? So it should be up further. So let me just read it to you. Right? You move to refer the report back to staff in order to provide clarity on questions from council and
This is, would you like to start from the beginning? On questions from council and to allow the public additional time to review the staff proposal in advance of a future council meeting.
So that referral motion's been moved. I'd like to debate the advisability of referral, and then if the motion passes, then I would propose that each council member be given an allotment of time to indicate to staff areas they'd like to see highlighted in a future report, revised report. Okay, is everybody clear on how we're going to go for? So I will do that. If I can find it here. Okay, so I've started an amendment queue. Looks, Councillor Liu, do you want to, you've already spoken, so I think we can safely advance you, eh?
Just to be clear,
Yeah, that's what I just said. Okay, are you completed your remarks? Okay, Councillor Reimer.
Support referral. I have my own questions, which staff may or may not be able to answer today, but certainly very mindful that the public doesn't get to sit here and ask their questions today, and we've received quite a lot of them. I know that as the lead on the Downtown East Side plan, and I think Councillor Stevenson and Carr during the West End plan know that the residents of those communities had a lot of questions over a long period of time, and now that we have to expand the notification area, I think rightly so that allowing that public more time to understand the proposed amendments and the implications that they may or may not have on their community. Certainly seems to be a great deal of confusion in the letters we're getting about what the actual implications are, and without getting into the content, which of course would be properly discussed at a public hearing, it seems quite advisable to give some more time to allow staff to work with the public to provide I mean, there's two issues. There's the information, and then there's one's opinion on the information. So it's certainly not up to staff to provide opinions to the public, but the information part, it feels like we could, more time would definitely make a difference on that. And I do have some questions to staff that I'm hoping will be brought forward before it would come back for referral, so that I could better understand those before we debate referral to public hearing.
Thank you, Councillor DeGenova.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to support the amendment. However, I also would like to seek some clarity. I understand that it says right now that a future council meeting. However, echoing Councillor Reimer's comments, we have received a lot of correspondence, many emails, all of us, and I think one of the overarching themes that I certainly find from these are the public doesn't necessarily feel that they're informed. I agree that there's a lot of confusion right now. They don't really understand the ramifications of the decision. However, also they want to be a part of this process, and they're looking for dates and times that they can come here. And I'm very aware that they're not here today to speak to this. However, it would be nice perhaps if Councillor Louis could prescribe sort of a general time as to when he thinks that this would come back. I don't want to be too prescriptive of staff. However, I also want to make sure that we're setting a clear direction to the public, that we're being completely open and transparent about when this matter will be heard here at Council, and people will have the opportunity to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I concur. First of all, thank you, Councillor Louis, for putting forward this motion. I think it's an absolutely necessary step for us to take at this point in time because of the lack of clarity and as everybody agrees, the number of questions that have come forward from the public on this, which indicate the lack of clarity in this report regarding what is being achieved and why now. So I absolutely support the referral. I would also support the notion raised by Councillor DeGenova of some sort of general timeline, which could help, again, the public in terms of understanding the sequence of events that will unfold. So if it's possible to do that in consultation with staff, I would support that. But definitely would like to. And thank you for the opportunity too, Mr. Chair, for allowing us the time today to ask some questions of staff to see that those can be responded to in the report. And that's, I think, a good part of your motion, Councillor Louis.
Just to be clear, it's a question period, not an answer period. The answers would be in the report, so.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we're asking the questions today.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor Affleck?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, I support this. I think I was very concerned, like many of us, when this came to us very quickly. And I think that the question we always have to ask when we have reports to us as councillors and as a council, whether it's a referral or any report, is this the best that we can do in order for the public and for us to feel most informed? And in this situation, I feel that this is not the best we can do, and that to send it back to improve this would be very, very helpful. And it's something we should think about quite often on documents that we have here, and so that the public, when they come to the public hearing, feel that they have as much information as they need in order to help us make the decision. And I think that I'm hopeful that the report that comes back will have the detail and answer the questions that we've already received and you'll get today, that will make us able to make an informed decision at the public hearing, as well as hear from the public and get their further input. So I will support the referral, and I appreciate Councillor Louis putting it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Affleck. Councillor Deal?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll keep it brief. I too support the referral. I'm reading again through many of the letters that we received, and there's clearly a need for much more clarity in terms of explaining the implications of the report. We'll get to those questions later. But the need for some time to understand why this is coming forward, this, again, the sequence of events, as Councillor Affleck has said, and the ramifications and implications is clear. Not everybody spends all day reading reports the way many of us do, and I think this needs to be given the time to come forward in a manner of explanation and language and input, plenty of time for input from the public, that they feel that they really understand what we're voting on when that day comes.
Thank you, Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the Director of Planning for working through the report with us and trying to make it as clear as possible with such a complex issue. I'd also like to thank Councillor Louis. I think that the letters that we received are very interesting on this particular project. They really have read the documents that have been published, the legal documents. They've also read carefully, and it's clear that it's not clear to them. Every letter is different. Everyone has a different question. And I think it really does help the city if we're able to give more information and just make it clearer how we're responding to the legal questions that we've had. And I think that this is something that will be very good for the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ball. You had a quick response, Councillor Lee.
Just in response to some of the suggestions in terms of clarity of timeline, I think even Councillor DeGenova and Carr recognize that this is a complicated matter, and that by clearly defining a time frame without knowing what the questions of council might be, and of course not knowing exactly what the resources will be required to answer those questions, it's impossible to set a time frame. What I can say, though, is that we can verbally suggest to staff that this is of importance, and I believe, given the team of staff that have assembled here today, to be ready to answer and address our concerns, that they understand that this is a high priority item, and they will spend the energy necessary to answer our questions in a timely way and bring that report back to us in a fashion that both answers our questions as best they can, and while making sure that it's in context with a larger issue, not just related to this particular initiative brought forward by staff clean up some language that is required, but also in the framework of the larger issues that that arise as a result of the court decision. And so I would say it'd be ill-advised to define a specific time, but understanding that staff understand council's urgency on this matter as well, and making sure that we do the right job is more important than having it done fast. And those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, seeing no further speakers, we'll go to a vote. And Madam Clerk, if you can help us get that displayed properly. Great. Okay, please indicate by voting whether you support referral or not. And it passes unanimously among those present. So thank you very much. So now I'll go back to the main queue here, and we can go through some of the questions. Should we clear it and do it again? Okay. All right. So questions now to staff, and I think everybody's alive to the need to stay pretty close to questions and not tend into areas that could prejudice future discussions in this whole thing. Sorry. Do you have a point, Councillor Deal? No, we cleared it because it was up there, so now we're back, and everybody will get their chance. So I don't think there's a problem. That's what I've said a couple of times. Yeah. So for the most part, I mean, there may be some point at which Mr. Jackson feels he can give a ready reply, but I'm encouraging people to focus on stuff they'd like to see in the report and not get into back and forth here, because it's not really a debating stage of the meeting. Okay, Councillor Louis, if you would like to tell us what's on your mind, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's, in fact, what's on the mind of many of our citizens. They've written to us and made a number of comments, as I articulated earlier, in regards to this particular report, and which is concern to me that their comments are not directly related to the report so much, but rather on a broader scope of issues. And the question I have, Mr. Jackson, that hopefully you can answer as part of the report back, is how we intend to address those larger issues going forward and give the clarity necessary so that if we're not addressing them as part of the referral report that specific to these changes, then where will the public have the opportunity? And I expect the report that comes back will explain the component pieces to a degree as possible, but also outlining where and how the public will have that opportunity to input onto those pieces, because some appropriate, some of them, because of legal nature, it'll be more challenging. And I think that's important, that we're trying to preserve the public's interest when we undertake these processes the way that we do.
Through the chair to Councillor Louis, certainly it's important to set a proper context for the kinds of questions that have been raised through the correspondence we've received to date, such as this is not the only opportunity for the public to comment. They will be able to comment when council reconfirms the density, when the development permit, there's a public process associated with that, as well as the public hearing for the rezoning. We can set that, as well as how this component fits in with all the other components that need to be addressed as part of the judge's direction to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Zhang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My questions for the upcoming revised report have to do with social housing. As we've received a number of letters, in particular those at Jubilee House, for example, those residents in Limbo who are quite upset. They're quite worried, that it's over, and they hear from that the deal is dead and they're stuck in a crumbling place, and so they're quite concerned. So I have a number of questions around that. So with regard to this report in particular, the intent, as you outlined, was to reinsert the definition of social housing, and I understand why you're doing that. I think for the revised report, it should actually outline the reasons why a little more clearly. If we do not change it, it may indeed stop social housing throughout the rest of the city in other areas. To outline the impacts of not doing anything, if we just left it as is, what would happen? I think that's very important to understand that, as you pointed out initially, the context of our greater social goals, and that we have to really outline for folks. So in this way, the residents of Jubilee House, currently in limbo now, will have an understanding, and people understand those problems. Similarly, along the lines of, I do appreciate staff trying to make the changes as quickly as possible and bringing it to us today in order to, restart the social housing agenda across the city and make sure it's safe. But at the same time, we recognize that it could have been too fast, needs some more work. But again, the idea of making it really clear that what the delays or any lengthy delay will have for the various projects. Because I think people don't understand the consequences. We only hear one side, but we don't understand. And then, everybody gets different emails from different people about things. Oh, consultation versus what about my house? And so, that's what we don't hear, and I'd like to see that highlighted. The only other suggestion I could provide, so those are my questions pretty much. The only other suggestion I might be able to provide is when I read this report, as Councillor Deal kind of referred to it a little bit, when you're used to reading these reports, they all make sense. And it's like when I write a scientific paper for a journal, it makes great sense to me, but when I'm trying to teach it to a student, it's very difficult. So, changing the language to be a little more accessible, I often find that I have to do various versions of things. And I think that questions I get is, what does that word actually mean? Right. We all understand what density is and things like that, but other people don't. And so I think it's important that we provide, I don't know, maybe even a glossary or something like that in order to make it more communicable as part of the public engagement piece, is that being able to understand it is as important as what's actually in it. And those are my comments. Thank you.
And just briefly, through the chair, Councillor, one of the things we need to do, I think, better is to, when we have to attach such voluminous appendices, it becomes difficult for the public to understand what these are all about. And I think we need to set that up better so that when they see a black line version, that they're not thinking that we've attached that by mistake or something. So we need to make that information more accessible for people.
Yeah, accessibility is key, and really, I think we should really be highlighting the consequences of delays or this or that, and in particular with regard to social housing, because for me, hearing the letters I've received and the calls I've received from folks from Jubilee House over all this is just heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking because they're in limbo.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Jang. Councillor Reimer.
Thanks to staff. 4 categories of questions, some of which might be immediately answerable, but I'm fine to wait for them as well. My first take on the report, it's impossible to de-link it from the court ruling or the context of the court ruling, because that's the impetus for the report. I think it would benefit the public to have some contextual, and council for that matter, some contextual information. One could, I think, easily misread that this is a complete response to the court case, which, as you've pointed out at several occasions, it's not intended to be in any way. In fact, probably the most narrow piece of the court. I don't think we need an exhaustive legal explanation, but something that contextualizes the why of it a bit more, and then, maybe points people in a direction of what else, and you understand where I'm going with this, that there will be other responses related to other pieces of the ruling. On the notification, if this is on the narrow question that the judge, the impetus for this was around the notification, it would be helpful in the staff report to council prior to referral to public hearing to understand what would be done differently on the notification this time. And I'm thinking both quantity, geographic area, quantity will be related to that, but also quality of notification. Will there be any difference in the way that information might be communicated relative to the way it was communicated in the prior one? Third set of questions. Again, something that I'd like to consider as a counselor before voting to refer to public hearing, presumably, and here's where it gets a little tricky, but to try and guess what greater notification, what that was, if that's just simply a checkbox the judge was interested in us doing, or what the point of that was. I would guess that it was to allow for greater response. So to understand how one would collect those responses from the public, well, to provide greater opportunity for response. So I'm sure that it's up to the public to decide whether they respond or not. But I think in this, it's even more challenging because we, in the case of the Downtown East Side Plan, 3 years, 335 meetings, there was a lot of response there. So will that come back to us at public hearing alongside any new responses, or are we only getting new, what's the expectation on the public here? Do they also have to re-engage if they were heavily engaged before in the prior process? And then the last one is a fairly technical request, but I have noted that so far 100% of the letters I have received have gotten a basic factual piece wrong about the change that's proposed. So given that the number of changes that have existed over the last 2 years on this, I think it would be helpful to have not a black line version, but a very simple table that summarized, here was the original DODP before the Downtown East Side and West End changes. Here's what was done as a result of those changes, and now here's what we're proposing to change at a public hearing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, people seem to all have one or another of the older versions in their head, but don't really understand what's different about this one. Okay, thank you.
And the key, just to address the elephant in the room, that one of the concerns was that we were taking away the requirement for council to reconfirm the density. And actually, what we're doing through these amendments is putting it back.
Right.
When we took it out before as part of the West End plan. So we will make that abundantly.
That's exactly what I was getting at. That was done, but that isn't this version that's being proposed. So correct. I think that would help clarify for people that the information they have isn't wrong exactly, it's just not on the right timeline. Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. Councillor Deal.
And following up on Councillor Reimer's questions just now, having been one of the many councillors involved in one of the last community plans, I know how many hours and how many people's input was incorporated into those. And so for the people in the West End of the Downtown East Side, there seems to be a lot of concern about a report that seems to have something to do with the development of Yaletown, all of a sudden having implications for them and their community plan that they spend so much time on. So, and I've heard both people in Yaletown saying, why are you talking about the West End? And people in the West End saying, what does this have to do with us? So if we could have a real clarity of, it is in the report, but again, it's in planning talk. And if we could have a real bullet point form of, this is what was there before, here's what changed during the West End, there are 10 maps in this report, 9 of them in the appendices and 1 in the main report. And I don't think anybody knows which map to focus on to see what the changes are that are affected by this report and by the recent decisions. So the more clarity we can have around, this is the map that matters, this is why you're included in this report, this is why it doesn't seem to have anything to do with Yaletown, but it actually does. And as Councillor Reimer said, do we need to re-engage? If we're revisiting a decision that was made during a community planning process. I think that's really key. For me, I used to do technical training for people who weren't technical in the sciences, and it's about putting yourselves in the shoes of the other person. If you'd never been in a planning class, how would you understand how this affects you as a person who lives 3 blocks away or 2 kilometers away? I think that would be really useful. What can you expect to see differently based on this? And I think it's a smaller difference than most people think, but it's unclear. The second one is, what is the rush? There is the concern over Jubilee House and the people in the housing there, but this doesn't seem to directly relate to that. I understand how it relates to it, but what is the rush on this smaller piece of the response to the judgment, and how does that fit into a long-term timeline in terms of addressing things that were mentioned in that suit, in that judgment? So I think that's really important. Is that why is this piece being done quickly, because it did come forward very quickly, and how does this relate to the community plans and potentially change them or not?
And Councillor, if I could address that very briefly, is that it does affect a number of other projects, both in the West End and the downtown east side, where we were proposing to use the density bonusing, and relying on the old kind of very poorly defined term of low-cost housing caused doubt in some people's mind as to whether what was being proposed truly met the definition. And that's why we put it back, or sorry, that's why we had them changed in the West End and the downtown east side plan, and why we intend to use that same definition, because it provides such specificity for upcoming projects and, again, addressing Council's broader objective of providing affordable housing.
Right. And quite a few of the letters refer to confusion over those definitions and consistency of them throughout the system.
Yeah.
But again, it's making it very clear whether this decreases or increases opportunities for consultation as well. Thank you.
Councillor Deal, Councillor Carr.
Sorry. Thanks very much. I will reiterate the questions that I emailed you. Sorry for the late email last night. Some of them have already been asked.
Councillor, at 12:06 p.m. or a.m. that we received.
I didn't expect you to be awake or answer them. But
relevant to the compensation review, Mr.
Okay, so some of these questions, as I say, have been asked, especially the one about how the public can expect us to be dealing with the whole of the Brent Hill decision and the other pieces, especially the requirement of the judge that there be new public hearings and struck the Development Permit Board decisions. So that you already dealt with. I'm interested in looking at page of the inconsistencies that I see in this report, and maybe they're not, just needs clarification, but on page 4, in the second paragraph of the report, there's a statement that says, and you've reiterated it verbally, that the elimination of the requirement for council to approve the bonus density prior to Development Permit Board issue has been struck now in this report. And this report says that we are going to generally accept things in Appendix A. So I turn to Appendix A, page 3, and the language retains the Development Permit Board. This is in B at the top of page 3. That language retains the Development Permit Board's ability to permit an increase in density to FSR 6. Am I missing something in terms of that? Isn't it not supposed to be there like that? Isn't it supposed to come to council now if we are indeed
The Development Permit Board, through the chair, would still make its recommendation as to the form and acceptable density, but that density has to be under the coming back with the proposed amendment would have to be confirmed by council. So
Okay.
It still would have to be confirmed by council.
Okay.
Except in Victory Square.
Well,
I'll ask Kevin to.
That might be an excellent area for clarification.
Yes, maybe.
We'll bring that back.
Could you
It's a
please? That would be
complicated
good.
issue that was dealt with in the Downtown East Side plan when we dealt with the zoning bylaw change.
All right. I would like that clarification, and I would like the clarification of why that language is still in there, and that it does not replace the need for council to make the decision on increasing FSR. Thank you. There's also a section in Appendix B, page 15, which I'm not sure. This is about the Development Permit Board again, and it's talking about an increase in FSR for hotels. And there's a striking of language that says that they can allow an increased density up to 5 FSR, but then that's struck and it says 6 FSR. I don't understand why that's in there.
Okay, we'll put that into the explanation.
Yeah, okay. Looks like
It was done as part of the original bylaw that implemented the Downtown East Side.
Right, okay. Mr. Jackson, you did make a comment in response to one of the earlier questions by council about the fact that when public can comment, and that public can comment, you said, when council reconfirms the density. I'm disturbed by that language. What we're doing in this report is moving referral to a public hearing. At the time of that public hearing, should council not approach that public hearing with an open mind? Not a closed mind regarding reconfirming a previous decision, but an open mind in terms of listening to the public that comes and considering what they bring us as information in order to make our determined decision at the end of that public hearing.
Well, through the chair, of course, council should maintain an open mind and not make a decision until after they've heard from all the public. But those are two separate issues that you're raising. The public has an opportunity to comment with respect to the changes that are being made here through a public hearing when there will be a separate report coming forward for each project that proposes to go over the density for council to consider confirming the density or not, and the public has an opportunity to comment on that as well, and council does not make up its mind until it's received all the information as well.
I'm talking about the public hearing that's in this report, which is the around the downtown official development plan and the incorporation of changes from the West End plan and from the downtown East Side plan. So those have to do with issues of the right of council to retain its decision-making power around increased density and around the definition of social housing and the striking of low-cost housing. Maybe I'll go back a step. A question then, a precursor question would be, at what point in time were the public given the sufficient information to knowledgeably inform council of their opinion and their concerns regarding the striking of the words low-cost housing?
Through the chair, that would have happened both through the West End plan and through the downtown East Side plan, and the public hearing that was held on the zoning bylaw, which implemented the changes which were struck out. There was a full public hearing on that, and the public would have had an opportunity to comment at that time.
Councillor Carr, I mishandled my timers, and you're well over time, and I feel that Mr. Jackson is unable to restrain himself to try to clarify some of these points, but they would be best clarified in the report. So, sorry, but let me just finish my point. So, are you pretty well finished, Councillor Carr?
No, but I have sent my questions to, except for the last one that I was just talking, this last point. This I had not sent because it arose during the meeting.
Okay, well, I'll take the city manager's point, and then if you can just generally indicate the area that you'd like him to explore in the report rather than elicit the information, that would be better for all of us, I think.
Thank you, Mr.
City
Chair.
manager?
Nenny, just to clarify, there was a statement that Councillor Carr made that I think might lead to a misinterpretation. So I'd like Mr. McNenny to just clarify that the structure that was approved by council around density and what is outright, where does the DP board actually have jurisdiction that was approved by council, and where do we believe we need to come back? And it does vary in different parts, geographical areas, and I just want to make sure nobody's under any misunderstanding that every increase in density the DP board approves has to come back to council, because I don't believe that's the case. But in any case, Mr. McNenny, if you could just walk council carefully through that.
Yeah, then we'll go back to Councillor Carr. Maybe Councillor Carr, you can just sort of summarize for council and the public the general area that you'd like to have explored in the report. Okay, Mr. McNenny.
Kevin McNenny, Assistant Director of Planning. In the downtown official development plan, there are provisions to allow additional height and density in some areas for social housing. Across the downtown ODP area, though, there are outright densities, whether your market, your social, depending on the permitted use, you can do up to a certain density. In certain areas, like Victory Square, you can go higher for social housing, or in Victory Square for secured market rental housing as well through these amendments. If up to a certain density and height that are outlined in the plan. So those are called conditional heights and densities, and those don't need to come back to council. Anything beyond that, in very specific circumstances in the ODP area, the Development Permit Board does have the ability to consider additional height and density for social housing, but that additional height and density beyond that conditional level set in the plan has to come back for a council approval. So that's how it works. It's all based on trying to achieve that objective of affordable housing, and depending how far away you go from the outright, it requires council approval. But in the plan, there are certain areas where you can achieve higher densities for social housing without council approval, and other areas where you do, depending on additional height and density. I hope that's
Okay,
helpful.
thank you. Yes.
And I can bring back
I
those
think,
areas in clarity in the
That, I
report.
think that should be, the explanation you just provided should be fleshed out in.
Yep,
the
in the
subsequent
report, the next time, we'll make sure area by area, we show you exactly how that
Right,
works.
right. I'll make my comments or my questions brief. If we could also have clarification on whether or not, because this has been raised by the public, this allowance of the Development Permit Board to approve density contravenes our Vancouver Charter, and I note Section 566 of the Charter requiring public hearings before amending zoning. So just make sure that that's dealt with. In terms of the issue that we were discussing, Mr. Jackson, if you could be clear about the ability to of the public to comment on the removal of the words low-cost housing. I'd just like further clarification how, at what point that happened, in what way it happened within the two plans. Just affirmation, I guess, that the public hearing were about not the two others or the others that we may have to go through, or that we will go through, but this one, the ability of the public to be able to comment, as it is a public hearing, on the substantive issues, even though they may have had a chance before, councillors have raised that, but on the substantive issues, which are the two changes arising out of the West End Plan and the Downtown East Side Plan into the downtown official development plan.
Okay, thank you very much. So Councillor Ball is next.
Very much. The thing that gets mentioned most of all is, as Councillor Carr just mentioned, which is the requirement for council approval. And I appreciate Mr. McManey going through. I think that that's very helpful, because the question that I've got, and I think I have about 10 of them now, on the words has been retained at the requirement for council approval of prior DP board permitted issuance has been retained. And then there's the word pending a comprehensive review. And the question keeps getting asked to me, and I don't have the answer, and perhaps you can figure out how to explain that, because people are reading that as it will be changed. That pending just means we're only putting this in for a while, or that there's nothing they can hold on to there. So perhaps if you could expand on pending and what that actually means in terms of the citywide plan, when, how, and how they can depend on that. So that's a simple one. And then the other question is, people try to read these, and I understand how one gets confused, but there's a list of amendments, and then there's statements that say no changes will be made to these provisions, and people are trying to figure out how you can be amending and then saying there's no changes and what that actually means. So if you don't mind just trying to make that clear, because I have had that question a number of times now, what that means. But thank you very much, and thank you for expanding. It is helpful. Thank you.
And Councillor, I was thinking, as in response to Councillor Carr's comments, it might even be possible to put a map together of the different areas and say, up to here, DP board, up to here, discretionary, beyond that, it has to come back to council. A real simple map.
It would be so helpful to the public, I think, when they try to work their way through what the actual processes are.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Ball, Councillor Affleck.
Chair, don't have much to add. I think that it's important to understand and realize, I think for all of us, and contrary to what I think I've heard a couple of times today, is that we have a neighborhood that are highly engaged in this and highly informed, have provided us, as you know, with many specific questions that are complex and worth responding to, which I'm sure you will. So I don't think, I hope, and I don't want this report to be at all dumbed down or think that we have to patronize for any reason at all. I think it's the more detail I think that this neighborhood and the citizens in this get, the better we'll be off in providing in ensuring that we have a robust public hearing. So I just want to make sure that that's understood. With regards to the mapping idea, I think that's interesting. Also, if you've mentioned a couple of times the other projects in the other neighborhoods, I'm not sure if you're willing to list those other projects and what they might be and how, where that would be impacted by this, but I think that would be helpful. I don't have a list in front of me that would be what are these projects and where are they at in the process. That would be helpful. Councillor Carr has mentioned page 4. I think that's there's lots of stuff on page 4 that needs clarification and elaboration, and I think that Councillor Carr has addressed that as well as probably in her email, and I think that we all agree that there's some contradictions and confusion on that page specifically that relate to the appendixes. And then Councillor Reimer also talked a bit about communications and addressing that and how this will roll out and helping us communicate that, and how will we work through this and how robust that process will be very helpful for the citizens to understand what we're doing and how we'll move forward. And beyond that, I think that you've got lots, and I trust that you, with your competent staff, will figure this out and come back with a very exceptional report. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Affleck. Councillor DiGenova?
So much. I just have a few questions. Many of them have already been asked, so I'll just go through the ones that haven't. I'm curious to know how many development permits that have been issued or applications that are pending that could be affected by the decision of the judge. I think that in making sure that we communicate that to both our development partners and the public who could be looking to benefit from the CACs, the DCLs involved in those projects, that would be helpful to have that outlined in the report, a rough number of how many different projects could possibly be affected by this.
If I could, Councillor, one of the problems we have is we can report on applications, but the pre-applications are much more difficult for us to provide public information because we're in the process of negotiating everything from built form, height, uses, all of that. But we'll endeavor to provide the applications that we've received to date.
Yes, I understand that, but just to follow up to that, I'm not looking for the specific projects, just the numbers of specific projects. So perhaps saying that there was 6 to 10, and you're not specifying those projects, so it wouldn't put them at jeopardy, but it would just be good for us, a council, and the public to know how many possible projects that have already been issued a permit are in jeopardy. And then also, what is our plan? I understand, and I'm sure many of the other councillors do, that through the emails we're receiving, a number of people feel that actually this proposed downtown official development plan specifically deals with only the decision made by the judge, and that's just not the case. This includes everything from the downtown east side to the west end. So I think it's very important that we communicate that at the public hearing, it will be this development plan and the amendments to this that we'll be speaking about. And I'm just concerned that if we don't communicate that properly, that there'll just be more confusion amongst the public. Also, just a follow-up and a few more questions regarding the social housing. Councillor Carr brought up a number of them, but in Appendix A, on page 1 of 3, I understand that we're talking about secured market rental housing. We're also talking about social housing that means rental housing. And we look at sort of the standard of the HILS or the housing income limits table. But I also understand that table is higher than what people receive from the government as their shelter allowance. So the shelter allowance is $375 a month. So if we're talking about social housing and the shelter allowance, how many of these units can actually be rented at the shelter allowance? I think that that's important, especially for our most vulnerable citizens, as Councillor Jang was talking about, Jubilee House, and perhaps even with the standards set out by the HILS table, some of these people can't afford the rents that we're proposing. So it would just be nice to have clarity, maybe have our own table as to what we're expecting there. And those are the questions that I have. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Council. That's all I have from members of Council, except for myself. I just would suggest one additional area that would be helpful either in this report or in a related communication to the public. Mr. Jackson, it's a tricky area, but this report only deals with one of the bylaws that was impacted by the court's decision. And I think it would be helpful either in this report or wherever our legal experts think is appropriate to kind of to take a bird's eye view of both the specific issues that the judge made decisions on with regard to these specific bylaws and where our legal opinions suggest there's wider implications for the approval and rezoning process. And I'm not insisting it being in this report, but I think the public would benefit from more of a high-level assessment. And I recognize the sensitivities of that, and there's legal advice and so on, but the quicker I think that Council could get advice in camera that could then be made public about our response overall to the decision, I think the quicker the public could begin to understand the timelines and that kind of thing. Because what seems like very, very quick to some parts of the community seems like a glacial pace to others, and it's helpful to see both those in the same place. So whether it's done by our own folks or we see it happening elsewhere, I really hope that we do get that higher level perspective. And I leave it to staff to determine whether it's relevant in this report or in some other fashion. So, okay, well, that concludes the questioning. Thanks very much, Council, for your patience with that. It's a very complex and tricky issue. I don't have any further business. The Standing Committee portion of the meeting is complete, and we'll now go into regular council. Madam Deputy Mayor. Should be good to go.
Now convene a regular council to deal with the recommendations and actions from today's Standing Committee on City Finance and Services meeting. Madam Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
This is a council meeting with Deputy Mayor Reimer in the chair. Mayor Robertson is on leave of absence, civic business. Councillor Louis. Present. Councillor Stevenson is on leave of absence, civic business. Councillor Deal. Here. Councillor Jank. Councillor Meggs.
Here.
Councillor Ball. Present. Councillor Carr. Here. Councillor Affleck. Here. Councillor DeGenova. You have a quorum, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. We need a motion to adopt the committee's recommendations. Moved by Councillor Jang, seconded by Councillor Ball. Sorry, I'm trying to remember if I need a seconder. I do, and it's been seconded. So all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. We do have one piece of urgent business that's been brought to my attention. Councillor Deal has a motion for a leave of absence.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to, okay, thanks. I'd like to move a leave of absence for Councillor Jang for tonight for personal reasons.
Moved and seconded. Any debates? Seeing none, we call the question. Any opposed? Passed unanimously. So now I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Deal, seconded by Councillor Jang. All those in favor opposed. That motion carries. This meeting